Am I the only one that enjoys using the two-handed weapons in Skyrim? They're definitely a lot cooler than their one-handed counterparts, but they are worse in my opinion. They're slow, difficult to use, and annoying in general. However, I do think they have the coolest animations in the game by far. There's no other feeling than slamming some poor soul with a giant warhammer. For the sheer coolness factor of these weapons, I believe they have a place in this game. Just like the one-handed class, the two-handed class of weapons have a bunch of unique weapons with crazy effects that can't be found anywhere else in the game. Let's rank these weapons to finally find out which weapon is the best in the game and which one is the worst. Just for clarification purposes, my definition of a unique weapon is a weapon that can only be found in the game once. It may have a unique name, enchantment, or both. Furthermore, there will be a few weapons that we will be excluding from the list because they are either temporary or only obtainable through console commands. Just like the one-handed video, we will also not be talking about any Creation Club items on the list, mainly because they are incredibly overpowered and they will probably ruin the list. Go ahead down below in the comments and let me know if you use two-handed weapons, and if so, which ones are your favorite. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. The Woodsman's Friend has a base damage of 17, which makes it stronger than a typical iron battle axe. However, it does swing slower than one, which means that it actually has a lower damage per second than an iron battle axe. Additionally, this weapon cannot be improved at a grindstone, so the Woodsman's Friend is bad and will always be bad. There is a solid argument to be made that this weapon is the worst weapon in the game that isn't a kitchen utensil or made completely out of wood. Aegisbane has a base damage of 18 and it deals 5 extra points of frost damage to the enemy. It can be found in the dwarven ruins of, I can't pronounce this word, so I'm going to put it up on screen, being carried by Alan Dufont. This is a pretty weak weapon. Besides it doing as much damage as a traditional iron warhammer, Aegisbane has a weak enchantment too. 5 frost damage is not even noticeable, especially on a warhammer, and a ton of enemies in Skyrim resist frost. All Nords, frost animals, trolls, Dwemer enemies, and most undead enemies have some sort of resistance to frost. Aegisbane is a bad weapon with a rather weak enchantment, and it will most likely rot in a storage chest once you defeat Alan Dufont in the Dark Brotherhood questline. Trollsbane deals a base damage of 20 and has a unique enchantment. It will deal 15 fire damage to trolls. Trollsbane can be found west of Cradlestone Tower. Now, to be fair, Trollsbane is one of the best weapons to use against trolls in the early game. Heck, it might even help you against that one annoying frost troll that you fight on the way to the Greybeards. Trolls are weak to fire, so this weapon will do a lot of work against them. It even benefits from smithing perks too. However, just because a weapon is decent against one type of enemy does not make it a good weapon. It's just not versatile, and it's not really worth the carry weight just to do decent against trolls. It's pretty terrible against all other enemies in the game, so it just ends up being dead weight until you use it that once in a blue moon time. The Headsman's Axe deals a base damage of 17 and it has no enchantments on it. You might be thinking that this weapon cannot be acquired in the base game, but it can. You can obtain this weapon by either defeating Atar, the Executioner in Solitude. You can also pickpocket him for the weapon, and you can complete his quest to get to him to be your follower. This weapon is truly unique. No other axe in the entire game uses this texture. At face value, it seems like the worst axe in the entire game. However, it has one of the biggest advantages of the list here. It has the longest range out of any melee weapon in the entire game. This could be useful for players on Master or Legendary difficulty because it could help you out if you need to fend off opponents at a greater distance. However, its weak base damage and lack of enchantment drags it down the list a lot. As you will see, there is a better option to deal with ranged opponents in Skyrim later on in the list, so stay tuned for that. The Rueful Axe deals a base damage of 22, and it deals 20 points of stamina damage. On paper, this weapon sounds pretty good, so what makes it this far down on the list? It actually has the slowest swing speed in the entire game out of any other weapon, even slower than the heaviest of warhammers. The DPS on this weapon is meh, and stamina damage doesn't have much of an impact in most fights. You also have to give up the Mask of Clavicus Vial in order to get it, which is actually one of the better heavy armor helmets in the game. The Rueful Axe is a bit of a pain to use, but it could pay off in a very few select scenarios, but the slow swing speed and the weak enchantment leaves a lot to be desired for. Found in Ironbind Barrow, the Steel Battle Axe of Fiery Souls may seem like a non-unique axe, but it has a unique name, so I must include it on the list. This weapon deals 18 base damage and it deals 10 additional fire damage and will apply a 5-second soul trap effect to the enemy. This weapon is pretty great in the early game. The fire enchantment does a lot of work, while the soul trap is really nice. At the end of the day, the dual effect can be recreated using the extra effects perk in the enchantment tree, and so it could be put onto a much better axe, such as a Dragon Mode Battle Axe or something like that. So this weapon won't be very relevant to enchantment builds. It's also just a steel axe at the end of the day, so it has limited use in the middle and end game, so it's a pretty mediocre weapon. Stormfang has a base damage of 17, and it has an enchantment that deals 30 points of shock damage to the opponent. To get this weapon, you have to defeat the Reaver Lord at Brodier Grove in Solstheim. This weapon is just okay. As a steel greatsword, it doesn't do that much damage, but the enchantment does help it out quite a bit. That's really it. I mean, this weapon is pretty boring. You'll probably have better options by the time you find it, so it's not really worth picking up in a playthrough. Unless you really need shock damage for some reason, there are a lot of other better options to deal with basic enemies in this game, instead of Stormfang. So now we're moving into the realm of weapons that are pretty decent. Most, if not all, of the remaining weapons are worth picking up in your next two-handed playthrough at some point. The Ebony Blade is a solid weapon with a lot of unique features. It has a base damage of 11 with a unique enchantment. Now, it may seem like the weapon's base damage is really low, but it has something to make up for it. It has the fastest swing speed out of any other two-handed weapon in the game. It's about as fast as a regular one-handed sword, so it's not that bad. The enchantment is the main focus of the weapon. It's an absorb health enchantment that will get stronger for every NPC that you kill that considers you as a friend. It starts out as a 10-point absorb health enchantment and will gradually upgrade up to a 30-point enchantment after ending the life of 10 friendly NPCs. At its minimum power level, the Ebony Blade is pretty meh. However, at full power, it's almost impossible to die when using this weapon. The fast swing speed will mean that you'll be able to stack absorb health enchantments really quickly, and it has an unlimited charge without the need for soul gems. The only problem that I have with this weapon is actually getting it to max power. I'm not sure how many players would be actually willing to make this large sacrifice just for a weapon, but let me know down in the comments below whether or not you always charge the blade up when you get it. But for now, I'm putting the Ebony Blade here for its ethical dilemma. The Long Hammer deals a base damage of 21, but it swings about 33% faster than other Warhammers. While this weapon looks like an ordinary Orcish Warhammer, its fast swing speed gives it as much damage per second as a Daedric or Ebony Warhammer. It's pretty good. That doesn't even count as an enchantment, so you can use the Elemental Fury Shout to further increase the attack speed for a limited time as well. Besides that, the Long Hammer doesn't really do anything special. Many other weapons on this list have some sort of extreme enchantment or special ability that makes them stand out. The Long Hammer does not. This weapon will get the job done for most situations you will find yourself in, but it doesn't quite overachieve like some of these other weapons will on the list. It's still a great weapon though. Wuuthrad deals a base damage of 25, and it also deals an additional 1.2 times damage to elves. To clarify, that means all High Elves, Wood Elves, Dark Elves, and Falmer enemies will receive extra damage. Wuuthrad has a very high base damage, and it can also be used as an arcane enchanter to add an additional enchantment to the weapon. Overall, it's a decent weapon to take care of normal enemies, while also dealing a bit of extra damage to elves. The only thing is that elves are somewhat uncommon to fight in the game, and even then, the bonus against them may not help that much in the long run. It works really well against the Thalmor faction and tough Falmer enemies, but other weapons on this list will be more helpful against a broader range of enemies. Wuuthrad is still a solid weapon because of its base damage though. Volendrung deals a base damage of 25. It also absorbs a whopping 50 stamina per hit. You can get this weapon after level 9 by completing the quest The Cursed Tribe, which is started by going to Largoshbur Stronghold. Volendrung is a good weapon. It deals plenty of damage, and it leaves your opponent completely drained of stamina after a few hits. Since you actually get back stamina instead of just straining it, you're able to infinitely power attack with this weapon. However, that doesn't really say much since you're able to do the same thing with any other weapon while you're under the influence of vegetable soup. In summary, Volendrung's damage is high, but the enchantment can be underwhelming. Since stamina damage as a whole doesn't affect too many battles, the enchantment on this weapon leaves a lot to be desired for. The Bloodskull Blade is a good weapon. It does a base damage of 21 and it has a very unique enchantment. You can find this weapon at Bloodskull Barrow after clearing the Ebony Mine in Raven Rock. The quest is called The Final Descent. Whenever you power swing, the blade will release a blast of energy dealing 30 points of magical damage when it hits an enemy. On its own, it does about the same damage as a glass greatsword, and it can be upgraded, but it does not benefit from any smithing perks or anything like that. This weapon will help with the biggest weakness of two-handed weapon builds in my opinion, lack of range. It can be challenging to close the gap in a fight against ranged enemies, but this weapon will help to combat this weakness. Not to mention, this weapon works great with powers and consumables that can give you stamina over time. Things like Vegetable Soup and Adrenaline Rush for Redguard players can help you spam power attacks over and over and over again to absolutely destroy enemies. The Bloodskull Blade is a great weapon that most players should acquire in the game, and has one of the most powerful effects. It's incredibly versatile, and it should always be at least carried around for when you have to deal with archers and mages from afar. The Dawnguard Rune Hammer deals 22 base damage, and it utilizes a magical spell with its enchantment. You get this weapon differently depending on who you side with in the Dawnguard DLC. If you side with the vampires, you can find it on Isran's corpse at the end of the DLC, and if you side with the Dawnguard, you can find it after completing the quest The Lost Relic. When you block bash a surface with this weapon, it will apply a 50 damage fire rune to that surface. Like other fire runes in the game, it will cause a fiery explosion once an enemy comes in contact with it, kinda like a magical landmine. If you see my destruction ranking video, you might know that I rated runes pretty low, so you might not think I like them. However, I do really like runes, I just don't think that they compare really to other destruction spells. In this case, however, a rune spell basically attached to a weapon is great. Not only can you set traps with this, but you can also basically guarantee a 50 damage hit whenever you enter combat. If an enemy is running at you, simply slap a rune on the ground to deal massive amounts of damage before the fight even begins. The one downside is the low base damage for a Warhammer, but that can be negated because this weapon does in fact benefit from smithing perks. The Dawnguard Runehammer makes for some pretty fun and different gameplay in Skyrim, and it's also super effective at what it's trying to do. The Champion's Cudgel is a Warhammer that deals 24 base damage and has one of the best enchantments in the entire game. On every hit, the Champion's Cudgel has a 50% chance to apply a 25 point damage effect of any of the 3 major elements. However, it's 3 independent event chances per element, so you have a chance to apply 1, 2, 3, or no effects on every hit. So you can basically get a maximum of 75 extra damage per hit and a minimum of 0, so it's a little bit inconsistent. But you have a very good chance of at least triggering 1 or 2 of those effects on every hit. 24 base damage on a hammer is actually quite bad, but the enchantment really carries the slack. In fact, it might just be worth it to disenchant this weapon and then apply the enchantment to a Dragonbone Greatsword or something like that. With all of that, this weapon is a really good pickup for pretty much every player using two-handed weapons, and every other player should pick it up just for the enchantment. That is all of the two-handed weapons in Skyrim. I've got to say, my favorite weapon is the Bloodskull Blade. It looks really cool and has a really fun enchantment on it. Thank you all for watching. If you found some value in this video, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like, and please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you all for watching and have a great rest of your day.